Video is rolling. Audio is rolling.
Oh my God. And my intern is leaving.
Bye.
We'll miss him. He left without offering to play me any entrance music. It was ridiculous. But I don't know why he didn't want to play me any entrance music. He didn't even
Can add it later.
He didn't bother to set up a couple drum machines and a bass and a mixer and all that to do it, and I turned him down. He didn't even think to do it for me. Bastard.
Bastard David Logan Childers. No, we love him. Thank you.
But anyway, here I am with Mr. Dylan Lane. I have a philosophy talk tonight that few people know about, few people will be at, but you got to start. And I've been meaning to start really unpacking my philosophy and the philosophy of others who I've found influential for a while. And I found this passage after I'd already set up the event and thought that it was a good one to put everyone in the general landscape of our time as I see it, to understand the world in the way that the continental philosophical tradition sort of understood the world up until about 1940, and then the divergence that comes after World War II and into our time. And you can kind of trace all this back as long as you want to trace things. But anyway, hey, Mr. Dillon, tell everybody something since we're doing this.
Well, I'm actually very interested in hearing how Chase wants to present these philosophical talks, because I think there's something very profound happening here, and I think people are going to want to hear it, and they might need to hear it, or at least the people that are attracted into something like philosophical discussion happening over here. Like, I think the perspective that Chase is going to bring is going to be from a more like European, Western philosophy and viewpoint. He'll obviously elaborate on that, and then I'll be able to polarize that philosophy with my own personal philosophy, which is the yogi householder philosophy, which I'll run every idea and concept that he brings to the table and explains and elaborates. I will approach it from my own philosophy, which is this yogi householder philosophy influenced by Vedanta philosophy in India, the Vedas and the Upanishads as an actual reliable source of knowledge. So, but my goal will be to run it through the lens of my practical application of it. So taking this high philosophy and all these abstractions and then transmuting them into a practical way to live, and like through my own example, because I've practiced the philosophy. So then I will attempt to elaborate my philosophy theoretically and then show where I've practiced it, and then try to bridge that gap without being didactic or pedantic, which I think is very difficult for me to do, because I always want to do this moralizing shit, and I also want to drill points and annoy the shit out of people. But shout out Hermann Hesse, a huge philosophical and psychological influence of mine, for the words didactic and pedantic. Heard them used correctly by Chase early on in our conversations, and I was like, hell yeah, I guarantee we're going to have some good talks anyway.
So, yeah, so where I'm at, it's interesting though with the East-West thing is that, studied Western philosophy, student of Western religion, and then became a professional wrestler. Too much to get into, but after being injured wrestling, I went and started doing yoga. Now I had some exposure, a degree in philosophy and religious studies, so had cursory glances at Eastern religion there, but I didn't really get into yoga until it became like a necessity for me to get like strenuous physical exercise that was also good for rehabilitation. So, just being as type A as I was, especially at that time, I was only going to do something that I felt like solved a lot of problems.
Yes.
And that sort of mindset is typical of the West. I mean, but nonetheless, like eventually I was in yoga, and my teacher, I had a class I went to regularly, and so I felt like the teacher was talking directly to me, because I was always fidgeting and carrying on, trying to get in this perfect alignment or something while I was doing the savasana. And I'm just like, I'm supposed to be chilling here, but I'm trying to perfect chilling as I'm doing it.
Very Western.
And so so I mean, in typical of so many things, and so she said that, and then I was like, man, I got to figure out why. And then I went to other yoga teachers and stuff at the time, and I was like, and I said, the person who told me about Eckhart Tolle, I never really got into Eckhart Tolle, but I did get into mindfulness. But when I saw this alarming problem with myself at that point. I was like, man, I can't sit still for even a moment without trying to control or perfect the situation that I'm in. And so I got into mindfulness through Sam Harris. So I went the sort of Western route with that, and started doing regular meditation and things. But the meditation is what unlocked the mindfulness is what really unlocked phenomenology for me. So that's really where it all came together was but developing a mindfulness practice. I was able to get in touch with experience, and the goal of phenomenology is to describe experience, not to argue about it, not to prove something, but to describe it as closely as possible, and then to see where the meaning is given.
Wow. So I was going to actually, internally, I was thinking I want to ask him about phenomenology because it's not the only time I've ever heard it is when Chase said it the first night that I ever met him. And I was like, okay, tell me about this. And he just kind of laid it out there. And I think kind of what you described reminded me of like the logos, like truth, using word to describe truth and then try to ascribe some sort of meaning to it that we can all agree on. Like, this is a statue of Hanuman, the servant of Ram. This means something to a lot of different people in different ways, but like, however it's been described, we're attempting to describe it truthfully as it manifests. Like, I don't know, that just kind of popped into my head, like when you were saying that. So it's good this is one thing I like about the exchange of ideas and theories and concepts face to face with somebody that has different ideas than you, is that I can get another viewpoint of the mountain, so to speak. Like, he literally comes and starts talking to me about his viewpoint of philosophy and his experience with Western religion and then his upbringing. A lot of those universals slide right on top of mine, but the way he describes them from the philosophical background, it's different than the way that I have described this phenomena of my life experience. But I'm learning. I'm literally like, I don't have all the time in the world to study every approach to philosophy. So then when we come together, we can share the way that we can try to attempt to describe phenomena, essentially, like how we've experienced life.
So, I guess, so Emmanuel Levinas, I first heard of him through Derrida, I think, or John Caputo. Yeah, I'll take some of that too if I can, my friend. Hell yeah.
I received this sativa marijuana as a tip for driving Lyft. Somebody gave it to me. We were actually discussing philosophy in that Lyft ride, so that's kind of relevant.
Hell yeah. So, and it's good. So this is a piece of Emmanuel Levinas. This philosopher legitimately changed my life. I didn't really hold that well. Because he has a commitment to morality as first philosophy. So first philosophy is sort of a technical term. Descartes, right, who said, I think, therefore I am. First philosophy is literally the philosophy you must begin with. It is like your geometrical axioms. If you don't know that a right angle is 90 degrees, then you're not going to be able to do a whole lot of geometry, right? Particularly not anything dealing with, right angle triangles or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So without these axioms, then you can't build the rest of the worldview. So Levinas, Descartes said certainty, the certainty of the ego. I think, therefore I am. The most certain thing that we can build everything off of is my existence, is what Descartes said. Okay. What Levinas is saying, the most certain fact that we can build our truth off of is concern for the frailty of another, or love. That it is the vulnerable face that gives our life meaning, that opens to discussion where knowledge is constructed. So knowledge is constructed out of goodness, moral relationships between people. If we can have a conversation, we can develop a system, we can develop truth. That's the most certain thing, is that the pull of the other is the foundational point. The call of the other.
This is so. He said several things there that I want to lay this philosophy over. So he introduced, Emmanuel Levinas as a primary mover in his development. So he actually had a book. I have a shirt on. It's Paramahamsa Yogananda. So my primary influence for this philosophy would be Paramahamsa Yogananda first, and then going back further in time, it would be Patanjali's 8 Limbs of Yoga, which lay over exactly what he was just describing. So he brought up the morality and the responsibility to the other. So in the 8 Limbs of Yoga, the first limb is yamas, and yamas is basically like things that you don't do, and that's because you exist in relation. So to actually perform yoga, the first key is to have a moral compass. It literally lays right over the first thing of the West. So part of what I'm going to attempt to theoretically prove through word, but also through embodiment, is that the philosophy of the West or the East that I'm influenced by and the philosophy of the West are both universal when they're applied, which is to say, if you act it out, it will prove its worth. So then the theory now we've already matched immediately as the same, the first thing in the 8 Limbs of Yoga. So if we want to get to the end goal, the first thing we have to be is a moral person. We do that through abstention, things that we don't do. You could think of it as like moral law or like the 10 Commandment type thing. And then the second thing would be observances, which you could think of as spiritual or religious. It doesn't matter which society you come into, and it doesn't matter where you are in time and space, geographically, culturally. If you lay over those things, I'm going to be moral in relation to other, and I'm going to observe whatever the rituals and spiritual things are of the time that will change continuously, then we're going to be good from there. And then also I wanted to, he brought up Descartes, and I think therefore I am. The fundamental in Vedanta is that Brahman is, the universal Brahman is, so it's almost a fundamental reverse, but it gets you to the same thing. I am that I am versus I think and then I am is essentially the same thing. Like, it's not dependent. And I'll even throw in just Hermetic philosophy just to show the universality of it. This would be originating in like Northern Africa. The first principle in the Kabbalion, the Hermetic philosophy, is the universe is mental. So whether you say I am and then I think, which would be like the Brahman is, so therefore the universal soul is, therefore the jiva, the individual soul is, the same thing is the thing is thinking, and therefore all the things are happening. I'll throw another layer on. In Taoism, it's the one becomes the two, becomes the three, becomes the 10,000 things. So look, we just pulled out 4 philosophical ideas, and it's like we can overlay a universal philosophy that starts to underlie all those apparent separations. And then I'll shut up.
Yeah, well, the last thing you said about the one and the multiple, essentially, like, I've pulled that out of the Upanishads. Is that it's talking about the love. It's the light of love, I believe. The Lord of love is the one disguised as multiple, and so this gets at this gets at everything, right? There's the one and the multiple. This goes back to Plato, because it seems silly, but when you talk about I have one thing here, okay? Well, but it's the one. It counts as one in certain sets. It counts as a book, okay? Mm-hmm. But also, it's not one. I can very easily take pages out. I can divide it up, right? There's another set of which it is not one at all. right? It's the multiple.
Yes.
And so the thing is, in every single set, something has to count as one, but nothing is truly one, right? In language, because once we introduce things into language, there's an infinite possibility for how we can vivisect it.
Yes.
And what determines that? The other. We need to call this a book because we both can read, right? Cat out in the hall doesn't care what it's called, you know. So
Cat's his cat. So yeah, cat doesn't interface with the book the way we do.
I just broke that glass, man. I just like karate kicked the glass.
So that's actually a good synchronicity for me. Whenever something falls and breaks, that means we're doing the thing that we should be doing.
Breaking down boundaries, baby. So one thing though is earlier you were saying about the West and the East. One thing about Levinas is this is, in a sense, I think you can think of it as post-philosophical. So because the tradition in the West is concerned with being, with metaphysics, with like ontology, with epistemology, with all these things that we sort of have seen through to our end, and then now you get what the deconstruction of that. So the attempt to reduce everything to measurable and knowable by the West leads to this crisis where, okay, the people who know all of the things, well, we'll get into this, but how do they know them? Where do they know them? And if we're so unreliable, we have Dunning-Kruger, we have recency bias, we have negativity bias, we have all these things. If we know this about the limits of ourselves and our knowledge, and we're the ones who did all the research, we're the ones who did all the studies, then what foundation does any of this lie on? Mm-hmm. And the ancients had God. So ultimately what happens is, even Descartes leans on God. He says, part of how I know things, he's working out an epistemology. How do we know things? Part of how he knows things is God is good and not a deceiver.
Yep.
Again, that comes in. So when you get to the absence of God in modern times, and we've got to unpack a lot about what we mean by God. That's probably the most important thing. But
that's a critical thing. I'll attempt to do my best to do that from my point of view too.
Moi aussi. So an attempt, and essentially, Emmanuel Levinas is bringing God back. But there's a new way to think about it, and the new way to think about it is very much more in line with mindfulness in the East, because it's about describing the phenomenon. And it turns out, if we describe it exactly right, other people can verify
in their own experience.
Right.
That's okay. So the yogi part of the yogi householder is to practice a proven technique that other people have used and verified to locate the Brahman. So the yogi part of the yogi householder philosophy becomes the spiritual practice of the individual that's experiencing the individual ego as it relates to others. So you brought up the book with one, and then we can dissect it. And that's the same thing with God. Because God is infinite and omnipresent and omnipotent. In a relative sense, we can approach that from an infinite points of experience. So then it's vast. So then what does the yoga do? The 8 limbs of Patanjali, for example, will have you apprehend the Brahman at the end. In the 8th step, you go into the samadhi state, and the samadhi state is your own proof of the Brahman's existence. When you go into higher realms of the samadhi state, and I know I'm getting pretty abstract here, we just jumped to the 8th realm, but like the yoga of the yogi householder is to verify in his own experience the one. And then as it comes back down into the condescension of words, report the phenomena to the other, and then give them the means to scientifically go through a step-by-step process that lets you have the experience, so then we can rejoice in that and then act morally in relation to each other, and then everybody benefits from that.
Right. Or in parallels to even Greek philosophy, you have Plato saying that the philosopher king, the Calopolis or whatever, has to go, he wants to commune with the good, right? He wants to get along with this good and be alone studying it and verifying it. And then he has to come back out of duty to give back to the society that gave to him.
Yes, the
And-
opportunity to do it.
But even he claims that if you go and try to get people out of the cave, they will surely try to kill you because they're comfortable in the cave.
Facts.
But anyway, so to get to the talk, so Emmanuel Levinas, a Jewish philosopher born in Lithuania, he's the first person to translate phenomenology into the French, where Jean-Paul Sartre was to pick up his book, and that's to lead to existentialism in France. But in the war, Levinas was taken prisoner of war. He was Jewish, and being prisoner of war had him protected by the Geneva Conventions and things, but he lost most of his family. And he spent his years in World War II doing work in the forest as a prisoner of war. And one of the most touching passages he talks about in an interview is people would have them marked for dead. They walk through the streets, all the Jewish soldiers, and people would just know that they were dead men walking. And he said, but there was one thing that would remind them they were human, and it was a dog. The dog would see them returning to camp and run and jump and bark and see it just people. And he marvels at how we can dehumanize one another with our concepts, with our totalities, when animals don't even do the same. They recognize. So, but let me just get into this text. It's very brisk. So this is a book he wrote toward the end of his life, Humanism of the Other. And so it's basically humanism, in so many senses, has failed, in his estimation at this point. So what would a real humanism look like? Sartre, it's also a popular topic at the time. Jean-Paul Sartre has a famous essay, Existentialism as a Humanism. It's one of his popular talking points. I think that's where he defines existentialism as existence precedes essence. But anyway, a lot of talk about what humanism is at this time in France. And so I'll just let him talk. The end of humanism, end of metaphysics, the death of man, death of God, or death to God, apocalyptic ideas or intellectual high society slogans, typical of such manifestations of Parisian taste and distaste. Those notions take hold with the tyranny of the latest craze, but are soon reduced to bargain prices and downgraded. So he's talking a little shit. Their primary truth is methodological. They express a certain state of research in the social sciences. A concern for rigor makes psychologists, sociologists, historians, and linguists mistrustful of an ego that listens to itself, questions itself, but remains defenseless against the illusions of its class and the fantasies of its latent neuroses. A formalism is required to tame the wild proliferation of human facts that, broached in their contents, blur the theoretician's vision, and to measure the certitude of knowledge, which is more assured of the limits of its axiomatics than of any given axiom. The study of man involved in a civilization and economy that have become worldwide cannot be confined to a dawning of awareness. Henceforth, his death, renaissance, and transformation are played out far from himself. Whence the aversion to a preachiness that befell Western humanism, despite its past science and audacity, establishing in the remarkable ambiguity of lofty literature, lofty spirits with no hold on the realities of violence and exploitation. All respect for the human mystery is thereafter denounced as ignorance and oppression. To nobly say that the human in man, to think the humanity in man, is to quickly arrive at a discourse that is untenable. How can it be denied, more repugnant than all the nihilist vulgarities, wrote Maurice Blanchett in November 1967. So we're here at the end of humanism, the end of metaphysics, the death of man. death to God. Why? Because the primary truth of these folks is methodological. We have a method for getting at truth, and truth is the most important thing. Truth is more important than peace. This is the argument. We got to get to the truth. Oh, we've got the truth of democracy. We better hurry up and get that truth to the Middle East. We got the truth of free market capitalism. We better hurry up and get that to Cambodia.
Oh my God.
Right? So once we have the truth, our duty is to share it. It's manifest destiny. This is the West, right? Odysseus.
Man, this is wild.
I'm telling you. Okay. So Odysseus goes out only to come back. Odysseus already knows the truth. Greece, baby. I'm out to conquer, I'm out to do, and I'm going to get back home to my people because that's the truth, right? Contrast that with Abraham. Levinas is Jewish. Abraham is important for his perspective. Right?
Same thing as the Holy Grail, too.
Right.
We bring it back. You don't drink it and then stay with it.
Sure, that's the Greek influence on Jewish thought. So I'm convinced that most of the history of the West is the Bible and the Greeks. So if you can wrap your head around the Bible and you can wrap your head around the Greeks, you'll understand what the West does. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So sometimes people accuse me of like arguing against things that they're not saying, but they're saying them without knowing them because the deepest root of their belief system will manifest eventually. Like the logic of the West is what is sick. It is this positivism. That is what has killed God.
Positive in the sense that we're positive we know things?
Oh, positive in that we know things through logic, through science, scientism.
Yeah. We've extracted the end of something through some method, and then we're like, oh, we got the whole thing.
Right. How do you know that? Yeah, it's like, how do you know that? Oh, did you do a study?
Right.
If you didn't do a study, I guess whatever. Okay, well, did you do a study on whether or not you should do a study? Like, what are you talking about? There's, we don't only know things through science. In fact, science begins with Francis Bacon, philosopher in the Middle Ages, or beginning of the Enlightenment. This standardization has led to a lot of things, but it also leads to a lot of misunderstandings.
Well, because they think that the thing that they found through the method is absolute truth, so then they parade relative absolutes as if they're the full truth, as far as like something like, quote, trust the science. They parade that the science is the absolute. The absolute, we don't know what that is. We haven't integrated it with the rest of society. So then if we could just go on saying this relative absolute is absolutely 100% true, you're going to see the effects of it as it pollutes down into, because it's not an absolute truth, but nothing that is in relation to one, like these ideas that are relating in the phenomenal world. So the social setting. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no.
Just pushing them out as absolute truth will automatically corrupt because they're not absolute. It's like I'm about to go off, so I need to let it keep rolling.
Oh yeah, no. But you see, we're not talking about scientists. We're talking about scientism in a way, right? So like every magazine it's scientism. It's not that science is bad. It's just that the belief that science is the only path to any logical truth.
Yes.
Right. So it just becomes like follow the science, trust the science. It's like, well, why do we do it? Why do we do science? What is the point of science? Answer that question with science, and then come back to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not the primary thing. That's what Levinas is saying. He's saying morality is first philosophy. But when does morality begin for most people? It begins with God. And so morality as first philosophy is in some sense bringing us back to God. And I'll explain that in just a second. But I want to talk about the death of God. And I realize it fell out. I've read it so many times that the passage in the Gay Science, this is my original copy of it. It's just the book's worn so thin that the most important part in a lot of people's opinion, most popular part, fell out. But it fell out just in time for me to photocopy it for the event tonight. So I'm gonna go get it off the printer.
Yeah.
I'll just keep this rolling because otherwise.
Yeah, and I'll try to elaborate this idea that I was just getting caught on. So I won't just use science. I'll use like science, technology, the corporation, our government, political systems. We arrive at the end of an idea. So democratic socialism or a top-down hierarchy in a corporate setting, and we're like, the way that we are operating within this setting basically what I'm getting at is something like democratic socialism is like a pathology. It's like an idea that it only goes one place. But when we parade it as truth in a social setting as an absolute, it creates a lot of conflict. Like, so that would like conflict like with its opposite politically, like this right wing like populist type of thing is going to fight with that automatically. So this is like the conflict mind that parading absolutes, like Jesus Christ, and then I'll use a religious example. Jesus Christ is the only way. Well, that bumps up on anything that's not it, but there's a bunch of other things that are exactly like that. So as we bump up on them, the natural result of that is going to be this conflict. So when we don't all agree on the fact that there is an absolute truth and we can't perceive it directly, then all of our relative truths just basically go into this conflict. And this is what's happening socially in various different arenas. It's the natural effect of parading relative truths as absolute is going to be conflict, and then conflict and idea, which then it also leads to the destruction of the thing that he's talking about, which is the morality, the way that we relate to each other within that social setting where everybody's bumping up on each other with these absolute truths that aren't absolute. We are conflicted, so then we don't act morally, and then we deteriorate from there. And that's why I think with the talking about the death of God, he's going to, exactly how I feel and how I perceive God, he's probably going to describe perfectly, and why that's the thing that's needed over these subsets of God that we're talking about bumping up on each other, conflicting and causing people to act amoral or to act in a way that is in conflict. Anyway,
sure. I think immoral is in conflict. It's just to me. There's either the each for each, the all for all, or if it's not that, it's the each against each.
Yes.
There's no, once the ego is in, it's each against each.
Yes.
But anyway, we'll get there. It's going to take some time. In a way.
It's a lot to unpack. Sometimes I have so much flooding from here that it can't come out here, and then that's when I realize I got to just slow down and realize that we're not trying to get to we're trying to unpack everything.
It took 38 years to get here for me, and then and really just conversations like these, and lots of time alone. I've spent a lot of time alone to be such a social person. But I've always took time to do my diligence. I was in the library, I was in the gym, I was training in that goddamn ring. But anyway, this is not mad at it. It was the right thing to do.
Necessary.
You got to shed. But so this is a very famous passage in Le Gay Science, the Gay Science. by Friedrich Nietzsche. Sort of unfortunately translated. It would probably be better translated as The Joyful Wisdom. That's essentially what it is. And so here I have the man, there's a book on Nietzsche, also about a translator, Walter Kaufman, Nietzsche, psychologist, atheist, psychologist, atheist, antichrist, I believe is the title of the book about Mr. Nietzsche, who wrote this. But Nietzsche comes from a religious family. His father was a minister, and to me, he is one of the great prophets. The philosophy, the good philosophy of this century is the common sense of the next. When he said God was dead in the 19th century, like, people were like, this is crazy, this dude's a nut. And by the time now is rolled around, how many people believe in God? And how much does a religious opinion hold sway?
In our secular society, it goes
against you.
Yeah.
You'd
You
be
look
ashamed.
insane.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute. So this guy thinks because someone wrote a book, but we can talk about all that sort of thing.
Wow.
But I'm not oblivious to the criticism. I've spent my whole life actually levying the same criticism. So
I was definitely, just because on this particular thing, I was super atheist until 2015, militant atheist, would die on the cross for that ideology. That's kind of what I was trying to describe earlier about, like, we get into these pathologies that we parade as absolute ideological truth, and then we experience the consequences of them, which is usually a rude awakening that your truth that you're parading isn't a full truth, and you're about to learn the consequences of it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And so the madman, it's too good not to do it. So I got a printout because we're back in college. I don't know. You got there's 2 pages, but it's really only 1 page. It's just the way it had to copy. Where's the other one? There's one that
I got it stacked.
Oh, I see. I just can't tell. It's 125. The madman. Have you not heard of the madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped in their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I. All of us here are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all, that the world has yet owned and has bled to death under our knives, who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he said. My time has not come yet. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem aeternam Deo. Led out and called to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but, "What after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" Unbelievable. A pure work of art. Just the beauty. If you're gonna say it, say it like that. It's because what I truly think is interesting is, in our time, and I'm sure you know a lot of them. Sam Harris, who I mentioned, the new atheists, this sort of celebration, the God delusion. Well, the Dawkins delusion is a lot deeper. It's a lot more of a problem because
Its effects. Effects. We're in the effects.
All of society is built on the belief in God. Every religion, every culture. We are, as Marcel Eliade put it, the famous religious studies professor, right? Or I don't even know how to put it, anthropologist. Marcel Eliade says, after studying all the ancient cultures, says, hey, man is homo religiosus. We're religious to the core. And if we don't have them, what gods will we have to invent to replace them?
Science, technology, corporation, government, political systems, economic systems.
So, and he's saying we haven't felt. He's saying through this parable, we haven't felt it yet. Because another component of Nietzsche's thought is that he has this genealogy of morals. He's a philologist. He studied, the actual languages, the Greek, right? So he became obsessed with the ancient Greeks before Christianity. So his criticism of Christianity is it's this sort of slave morality. It's a power play at bottom. But anyway, beneath all that, I actually think he agrees with Jesus more than most people think. There's a synthesis to be made between the cultural critique that Nietzsche is levying and the cultural critique that Jesus was levying, and they just happen to be talking past each other at the time Nietzsche's alive, because I actually think the innovations of Emmanuel Levinas and phenomenology bring them together. They bring them back full circle.
What year did he write this in?
This is, I have the copy right here, but it's 19th century, late 1800s.
So it's crazy. I want to just bring this up. I can't explain everything that just occurred to me when we just did that reading.
It's
but
unbelievable.
There's
1840. Oh, no.
So I mentioned Paramahamsa Yogananda as like a key influence in this
1887.
1880. Okay. So his guru, spiritual teacher, spiritual father is a good way to look at it. He wrote a book called, it's funny, it's called The Holy Science. And what he wrote in reference to, it checks out with the book, The Holy Science. In the book, The Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar, he synthesizes the Holy Bible and the Vedas and brings them together and unifies them. That, what he's talking about. And during the time period, and this is what blew my mind, during this time period, there's something happening. Something is unfolding astrologically that he described perfectly in a philosophical sense that is detailed in detail scientifically by reading the stars. There's a 24,000 year cycle. The time period that was written in, he's describing it perfectly in the book, The Holy Science. What is known as yugas is different ages in Hindu philosophy and religion. And basically these yugas, which could correspond to the Greek ideas of the bronze, the metal, the bronze, the iron, bronze, silver, and golden ages, And he's echoing them philosophically here. And then in the Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar describes it astrologically perfectly, and the different characteristics that happen during that time period. It was Kali Yuga. So in Kali Yuga, God is dead because everybody's a materialist. There's no faith. And what happens is the social orders descend into chaos, and the conflict that happens when there's not a God at the head of humanist religioso is automatically conflict and war. And what did we see? We saw World War II immediately after it, or World War I. We saw World War II, and then what you mentioned in the divergence of after World War II thought, what we started this conversation with. And it's all documented in the yugas, but it's documented there philosophically. The Kali Yuga, or this time period, is a time period of materialism, and the transition happened 1945 after the atomic bomb was written. So Yogananda, in the book The Autobiography of a Yogi, mentions these yugas that I just referenced from the Holy Science, and he also explains the symbolic representation of the atomic bomb dropping, and that changes. That's when the yuga changed from Kali Yuga into Dwapara Yuga, which is when God is going to start to be introduced back into the collective consciousness from the root level by having conversations like this.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the significance, but now how? So he says we've killed God. How? How did we kill God? And I first understood this as like what Nietzsche meant was that when you, like, say, go through a suburban neighborhood and see the churchgoers come out, and then they go to a restaurant where where someone else is laboring on what they believe to be the Sabbath. Their whole life is shrouded in this commercialism. Like, if you can just look at it from that level, that we may even be religious. But compared to the ancient people, the Homo religiosus of Marcel Eliade, compared to ancient people and how they experienced religion has taken such a back seat. You're not going to look in your Bible to find out how to become an accountant or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, no one ever did. No one ever turned to the scripture for these, like,
they lived it.
Right. But anyway, so we have misplaced the role of religion because, honestly, organized religion had overstepped so many bounds that had become like, the fact that the church had to fight over whether the earth is round or not was really just an overstepping of the bounds of not a belief system or a faith, right? But rather a group of people who are trying to control things. Are they trying to control it because they believe souls will go to heaven and things like that? Sure, maybe there's some cosmic metaphysics going on that lead to their predisposition for being power hungry or something like that. But anyway, this imposition on people of religious codes had to battle with science over materialist gains. Essentially, if we wanted to improve our lives, we needed to apply science. But religion was at war with it because the religion needed, control of the state. But that altogether is a separate issue from whether or not there is such a thing as God, or that people need a spiritual practice, or any of the things, related questions, and how much of the spiritual practice is related to morality. So at some point we just sort of misplace. We thought that religion was supposed to sort of govern our lives and all that, but really it's God is supposed to govern your life, I think, is the viewpoint that I have now. But to get back to Nietzsche, so the ways that we kill God, how this has happened, is we've undermined him through the accounting. So we learn how to manipulate our environment, and then we think we no longer need the faith. We can now just see the way through it. I put the cannonball in the catapult, and because I did good math, I know exactly where the catapult, the boulder is going to land. And then we try to live our lives like that, which is how, like Levinas earlier says, We're living our birth and our resurrection and our death. We're living them outstretched from us. We're modeling our life and what it should be. I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to go to this. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to go on these vacations. I'm going to have this wife. We're going to go to this country club, whatever, right? And you have this model of your life that you are living vicariously through, and you're not experiencing it because it's divorced from you. That is a way in which we kill God. Because
Yeah, well, the phenomena of the catapult, we forget what happens when you shoot the catapult. So we're so happy that we can make the catapult go here, forgetting that it blows people up when it lands and kills them, and then
Right.
we're devoid from that experience, and we're at distant proximity from it, like you were saying.
Right.
So then we are like, yeah, go shoot the catapult at those people because we're in conflict ideologically.
right,
Because we both
because truth matters more than peace.
and our truth is not absolute; it's relative, and then we're forcing it on other people. Now we're shooting catapults at them.
So here's so that's the other thing about Levinas. So we're getting at we're jumping around, but the critique of objectivity is really where phenomenology begins. So Edmund Husserl, he's the founder of phenomenology. It's his work that Levinas translated into the French and all that I mentioned earlier. So Edmund Husserl is he's a mathematician, and he's worried about the crisis of the Western sciences. If we know things through data, but the data is only known by faulty minds like ours and all of that sort of problem that comes with it, then we've undermined all the knowledge that we're after to begin with. What makes us certain of any of it? And so he reinvents Descartes' project, right? Descartes says the ego is the beginning. I can be certain there's an I because I think. If I'm not here, who's doing the thinking? Is Descartes' logic, essentially. So I have to exist, is what he says. But what did the Buddhists tell us? When I look for what's looking, there's no center to this consciousness. I only know myself through objects in experience like every other. So the self is actually not certain at all. There's no self, the anatta. So Husserl begins at the point of the most certain thing is the phenomenon, the world. When I sit on my meditation mat and I'm as close to one with everything, it's just me, it's just the contents of consciousness, whether it's my breath, the feeling of the hard mat on my ass cheek, whatever it is, all of that is all there is. There's no self there. And so Husserl starts building out the theory of phenomenon. He's like, well, we have to describe first-person experience and understand what things are necessary. What are the structures of experience itself? So, for instance, time. Everything that happens in time. And what do we mean by that? We mean in duration, not the movement of a second hand. We don't mean a spatial metaphor. We mean time, duration. What does it feel like to be here now? This is the beginning. This everything we think happens in time, in order, in some sort of order, out of order, a random order, in an order, one thing after another, not everywhere all at once. There's a structure to it. There's different structures to consciousness that are necessary. And if we make those our axioms, if our axioms are subjective, then there's no contradiction when we build things off of those axioms and someone says, oh, but that's just subjective. It's like, yes, but it is built off of experience, and I know it certainly. We can build certainties off of proper descriptions of the structures of consciousness. So it's subjective, but there's absolutes.
You're literally describing the yoga philosophy. But I want to talk about a little bit of the death of God in terms of, like you mentioned earlier, about kind of getting this a definition of the word God.
Yeah.
And then, so I want to talk about God as essentially the ideal, the truth, unconditional love, or like the worthiest target to orient yourself
Sure.
towards. So what we do is when we supplant like that search, which you could call the first commandment, or the search for the I. So you mentioned questions several times, and there's the question that comes from the yoga philosophy of inquiring to the nature of yourself by the process of asking, who am I? So if we don't aim for the highest ideal, which would be like, I need to know the truth about God, myself, and my existence, and we aim low and land at science or
Existence.
politics or economics. Well, I also want to talk about existence too, because in the yoga,
Well, what I mean is, you say God, myself, and
Oh,
science,
yeah.
existence,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because
Like, what is this?
science is the study of existence,
Yeah.
not of self, not of God.
Exactly. It's
right?
always an outward.
So I just like
thing.
the tripartite thing, right? There's self, there's existence, there's being, there's ontology, the study of being, ontos, being. So sorry, I didn't mean to jump way in.
No, yeah. We're just talking about this ideal and like.
So
how
we're
we
like trying to
supplant it.
sketch out how the terms come together, how
Yeah.
and so that's why I jump on that, because I'm always referencing even internally in the house, right? Like with Logan things, people ask me, it's like, I'm worried if I'm in the account, because I'm always using. So ontology would be also a study of or an account of being. So it's the account of being that's where our self is.
Yeah,
But the account of being is not the deepest experience, right? There's the observing mind, the directing mind, if you're Marcus Aurelius, the consciousness itself, the container for which all these ideas exist in, all the objects, all the studies, all the language, right? That is the account. Counting what exists is ontology. So this is where the God thing comes back. So Levinas wrote a book called Beyond Being, or Beyond Being, Beyond Essence. It's got a double title, and he also wrote a book called Of God Who Comes to Mind. And so back to what we are. We're phenomenologists, Husserl, and then Levinas after him. And so how do we know things? We know things through our subjective experience. So we know things through our flesh. Everything we know by touch. The light has to touch our retinas, the sound, our ears. Everything we know by touch. So to get into God, whom we never touch, who we never see, what of God who comes to mind? If we're going to phenomenologically define God, how do we describe God in experience when we don't touch God? Then it's of God who comes to mind. When does God come to mind? And Levinas argues, God comes to mind when someone you love is hurting. God comes to mind when you're confronted with mortality. Yeah, there's wonder and all those things. But most importantly, God comes to mind when you're concerned for other people. Because you want to pray. What do? You pray. And that's an interesting thing. I don't know if I've ever said this, besides maybe to Shug. Prayer, in Levinas's view, is very interesting. Prayer is a way to basically rebuild yourself, because the self is a sound you know as an echo. So when you pray, you're concerned for someone else. So you pray, what you're really doing is figuring out who you need to be for them. You're imagining them and their needs, and if you could help them, you would. So you're telling yourself who to be.
Yeah, you're defining it for yourself so that you can go behave that way and fill the gap that you've discovered.
So for me, God is not a question of being. God is not a question of existence, because everything that is a being, I know through touch. I take account of beings. I count things. I put them in sets and say, oh, this is an atom and this is a quark and this is a fart, right? Like I label everything in the various language games that we play as humans by counting the things that I've come in contact with, either auditorily through someone giving me an account themselves and me figuring out language-wise what that is, or by touching it physically with some sense.
The senses, which is connected to the mind. I wanted to. You brought up two things. You were talking about the formless God that we can't perceive, and then the God that comes to mind. So you just described like the highest form of worship, this formless worship. But then what do we? Since we can't experience this formlessness like you're describing, where do we get to serve it when the other?
Right.
So then now you get into dualism. Now you're into the dualist, which is like I'm here as a separate ego and God is separate from me. So then I'll take a path of loving Jesus Christ or Buddha or whoever to get to the formless version of it. But then how do we do that practically?
Right.
We go help our wife. So then you brought up prayer though. You're figuring out who to be when I pray. That checked out with how I pray. So then as I'm praying and thinking of the other, so essentially morality, to bring it to that, now I know how to act and behave so that I can be in alignment with this ideal that gets killed when we decide to replace it with relative abstractions that we've gone through some method and now we have an account of.
Right, because that's so divorced from you. See, meaning is immediate.
You put it like how you see it on other people's faces.
Right. It's immediate. Meaning is given an experience. So meaning is like we can't give an account of meaning because the meaning is why we make the account. Right? Like if there was no meaning, you would never do science. Yeah. So you tell me, oh, life is useless or it's pointless and blah 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 and or whatever. And then by telling me that, what are you doing? You're illustrating another structure of consciousness. Hope. You're telling me life is meaningless because you hope I'll understand you. You hope I'll pity you. You'll hope this, you'll hope that. You'll hope maybe I'll take a hit. You'll hope whatever you're trying to talk me into by telling me that nothing means anything. And what you're mostly trying to do is telling me that I'm stupid for wasting my time becoming good.
Yeah.
And that's what it always boils down to. And that is how we kill God.
Yeah.
So now
I can see it.
So now the account, right? And the ego exists within the account. The I is short for here I am. I see someone approach, here I am.
Yep. I exist.
Okay? So now that the conversation begins with the gesture, with the approach, right? The meaning is immediate. I'm immediately not disinterested. Someone gets in the back of an Uber you're driving, you're immediately interested.
We both drive Uber, by the way. I drive Lyft, he drives Uber.
I do both.
Okay.
But it's been indispensable. Well, it was dispensable for a little while. I don't know if it's. Jury's out. You guys subscribe to the Patreon. It's determined how likely you are to have me as an Uber driver. So I don't know what's good. But it's like really, I can see your dilemma. It's like you could make us rich, and then we might not Uber drive anymore. Or right now you have a lottery, like you get a lucky lottery drive.
I'm gonna keep doing it as a fan promotion. Me as a fan is gonna promote everything that I do because I love it that much, and
it's fun.
Okay, how about morality? Let's bring it to morality. It is my way that I can serve the community because I don't get a filter. I don't get a filter that says this type of person can't get in. They just get in, and I don't know what they are, and guess what they are? They're a relative aspect of the community, so it gives me an unfiltered view. It's not unfiltered because the bougie people don't take it, but it's like it's pretty much the 80.
Sometimes they do though.
It's like the 90 percentile down will take a normal lift. So it's like I don't get much over that, but it's like
I had a couple that were over that though.
Yeah. Every now and then they'll filter in because they'll be economical and they don't care.
They need to go get their, There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of reasons, but
but I like to serve the community because I can learn the community and share what I have, but also like anyway.
But they're the one disguised as multiple.
Yes, dude. I just read that quote from my personal deity. That exact quote.
I love it.
That's exactly today.
It took me forever to understand it. I was afraid. Okay, there's another philosopher that's a huge influence on me is
crazy.
Alan Badiou, and he has a passage about the one and the multiple, and it comes from the Parmenides dialogue of Plato. So it's a very old philosophical question, but I was very uncomfortable with it for a long time. I was just like, what does this really matter? Until I started to see it in everything, and then once I understood. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, no, that is right, and it was this huge problem, and it was something that undermines knowledge until you understand it properly. You have to resolve the contradiction, which I told you the other day that how I'd found, but I don't want to go there. 'Cause it's gonna be a whole other thing. But but let's just drive home. So because we told them, a little bit of Levinas, they get that, essentially. The Enlightenment thinking has left everything feeling somewhat superficial. We have to account for ourselves through science. It undermines our knowledge, and also killed God, which he's referencing Nietzsche directly. We went back to Nietzsche. We read his most famous passage about the death of God. Not the first time he mentions it. He actually mentions it in section 108. This is 125, and he's sort of setting up this passage. But anyway, recap with Nietzsche. Okay, we feel what he predicted, how he prophesied of this, right? And now Levinas, for a phenomenologist, presence, touch, proximity, that's how we know things. So when the Jews talk of the Holocaust, they often talk about the absence of God. See, in the old, not the non-existence. See, we experience presence and absence. And so God never shows his face. This is why the Jews are the people of the book. It's the logos, it's this account that is this text. I shouldn't even say logos. The Torah is the source of spiritual. It's not an iconography. It's not images. It's not an animal. It's not a God with a visage, right? It's a God that will pass by Moses and turn his hair white or appear in a burning bush, but's never physically there. And so this maps very well on the phenomenology when we know God through presence and absence. And so since God is never present, we know God through others, through the face of others, through mortality. Because we know death not immediately ourselves, we know death only through others, through their absence. And so knowing others' death, knowing their mortality, makes us cry out to God. There's so many different ways to get at this, but ultimately mortality tells us that's when God comes to mind. When we're concerned for someone else, we realize their frailty. And so, missing there's one thing to tie this together is that there's a million things to tie it together, but so God comes to mind to for other God. Oh, that's what I'm trying to get to. Is God is the for in being for others. So. And I believe that maps everywhere.
Yes.
We're not going to take an account. We're not going to go fly a spaceship to find God. We're not going to go back in time and find God. We're not going to find God in our presence. Thank God. Because everything that I touch, everything that I come in contact with is dilapidating and decaying and dying. So if we put God into the account, if we say that God exists, then God will die, because everything that exists is fleeting.
Yes.
Time is going to burn up all space.
And you said maps to everything. Okay, so this is beautiful. You hit the points. I want to try to hit my points because you said the maps everywhere. So that's what the ideal is. That's what God is. What maps everywhere. And that's what we can't kill at the individual level, because then we'll automatically act amoral to the other. We won't be able to best serve them, and then therefore we'll create this conflict and tension, and then we'll have to fight with it in the environment. So when we keep this ideal at the forefront, we don't replace it with any pathologies that are relative that we mistake for absolute, and then we look to genuinely essentially obey the first commandment or the first yama or the first morality first, then all things that ensue from that will bear their effects automatically. And then you won't be stuck in a situation where you have to experience in the environment the absence of God, like the Holocaust, because that's the effects of a pathology that's relative being shoved down people's throat as an absolute truth. That's the automatic effect. You've seen it in China, you've seen it in Russia, you've seen it with Rome, you see it with what America's doing. We're taking relative truths, replacing them with universals, and then shoving them down each other's throat with catapults, so to speak, to use that example, and not being concerned with the fact that we're shooting catapults at each other. because we've killed that thing that would make us never do that to one another.
Right. So the reason I think Nietzsche says, there's some higher history after the death of God is the higher history it begins now, because before the belief in God would be how you know everything, right? So it would be a function of epistemology, and it still is, right? Like God is the foreign being for others. I know everything from others. All of my knowledge is for others. If it's just for me, then there's no way to verify that it's knowledge.
We didn't bring the Holy Grail back then. We didn't do our job.
Right. So, before religion had this tremendous authority, because we thought that was how we know things. Now we have a different path to know things. We do have science to empirically validate what it is that we're trying to get at. But what are all the accounts for? What should science be for? We study cancer not because we're interested in cancer, but because grandma has it.
Yeah.
The meaning is not in the account.
The harmony of these two ideas that you just described, the science and the religious, when we harmonize them and bring them together with a compromising mind instead of a conflicting mind, because she has cancer, we need to find an answer.
Right.
Versus this, they're wrong.
Let's conquer nature.
Yes, they're wrong, I'm right, and we're going to get them. It's no, it's when they serve each other. So this goes back to the morality of if literally all I want to do is serve you and I've served myself, then I can. Right. But if I'm not that, and then I'm not even thinking of it, and then I go out in the world thinking that I know how to behave and what is true, me as a militant atheist, I was moving through the environment relating to others, thinking I knew what I was talking about while I was acting out nihilistic atheism, and then I got confronted with its effects in 2015 when I had this insane acid trip, and that's when God was reborn for me. Yeah. But the experience to have it, it's like my own personal experience with an ego death.
Yeah.
What you're guaranteed to confront when you act out a philosophy and an ideology that's at conflict with universals like love, truth, peace, calm,
right.
Reciprocity, giving first, can I love first, something that I like when you say. And it's when we can do that, the effects are automatically not... The effects of that kind of behavior are automatically harmonious, but you can only see it at the individual and then the small family unit first.
Goodness.
Yes. It's hard to give it out to the huge masses, but you can see it firsthand.
We have to give up the greater good. The greater good always leads to evil. And the most unspeakable evils always come from it.
Every time.
The
greatest good for the most people always murders everybody.
Goodness. What we have to be on the side of is goodness. Small acts between people.
Yes. At the individual level.
Yeah, because that extends out, right? But it can't be universal. We can't, because every rule depends on how it affects someone.
Yep.
From their perspective. I can't jump into someone else's conflict because I have to have a perspective on it. I have to know, there's just so much. There's so much more to the subjective meaning that people have. And so we have to make a commitment to ourselves to have peace first at all costs, then we can work to truth.
And you can't universalize relative things.
And
that's why we have to act out the universal thing at the individual level.
Right.
So it's like I can't
wouldn't
force
even-
it on you. I can't be like, you have to do this because you're going to resist.
I think you could clarify what you're saying a lot easier for everyone if you were just to stop even mentioning the absolute and the universal, because because really there just isn't one.
Well, there is in the sense that like there's something that works in all scenarios, and it's always to be moral
to love
first.
Right.
So that universalizes. So that's the truth. That's what's dead in this whole thing that we're talking about. The thing that's dead is the fact of loving first and giving first and acting moral first.
But what I'm trying to say is
true and good in God.
What I mean is like that there's a I guess it's, I don't know that it's an absolute truth to say that, consciousness and the structures of consciousness, and the sort of describing them is the way to truth or whatever. That's the because of the story of an individual consciousness that individual consciousnesses that built this culture because they're conscious of certain things. Consciousness is always about
something.
Yeah.
It's always consciousness is of something.
Right.
Awareness is
and so,
primordial. That's that looker.
So the contents of the consciousness determine everything that we would even think is absolute. So I like to just abandon it and just say this is subjective. And then all I'm really trying to do is describe my experience. So a lot of what I end up having, people, I had someone the other day that thought it was just a stupid social media thing. I should not have responded to anything. I usually don't anymore. But one thing that I have as phenomenologist, people think that I'm trying to argue something. And sometimes I am, maybe about political history or something like that. But mostly I'm trying to describe experience. So I just want to know if what I'm describing also maps onto your experience, because if it does, then how do I know what's true? How have I always known what's true? Other people.
And this is an interesting thing that you're talking about, what maps with other people, and this is what the yogis have discovered, and this is what they would say is universal, because I would push back against giving up and abandoning the universal. There's three things that are universal. You exist.
Oh, that's
You're
true.
aware of it.
I see what you mean.
And you know it through your experience of it. So that's shared no matter where you relate to somebody, one-on-one or one on small group or one on large group. Right. You exist. You know that you exist. And then they add ananda. Yeah. So it's bliss. The universal experience would be called Sat Chit Ananda. So Sat Chit Ananda is you exist, you're aware of it, and it's bliss. Right. Once you're having that experience through direct perception, self-evident, you will know it's universal. Yeah. But you will know that people aren't experiencing it though. And then this is what the bodhisattva does. The bodhisattva descends from that to try to describe it, but also you're trying to lead the person into having the experience themselves. And there are different methods to perceive that Sat Chit Ananda. So that's why I'm always going to push back on things like you said, like maybe give up the universal. It's like you can't. The thing that maps everywhere is the thing that is true by definition. The thing that maps everywhere is the only thing that's true by definition, because you describe the world that changes as the thing that where God's dead because it's decaying. Right. The thing that, and this is where the Buddhists would say, nothing is real except that which doesn't change. That's how their definition of real isn't the appearance of this.
Right.
It's the definition of that which is real is that which doesn't change always exists.
Right.
And that's that's the universal. Yeah.
I guess
that's the thing that we quantify and qualify, so to speak, as God. And when we kill that thing, then we descend into all this relative chaos that we're discussing.
Yeah. What I'm trying to avoid, though, what I mean is not for the sake of it's not that I don't think like like you say the Buddhists would say you have consciousness, consciousness, which is consciousness of things. So you have being. Mm-hmm. There's being, and then there's desire. And
what's prior to it?
Yeah,
what's prior to the consciousness?
There's no way to know.
But could there be? I would say there's a way.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There's people that have said they know the way.
Right. but that's
Just
not
out
what
of
I'm.
curiosity. I'm just
I
saying.
don't know
though,
what you
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
because for me, consciousness is right. Like
Right.
I don't know before consciousness. I don't know if I'm unconscious, then I'm not.
Right. So then they would say, inquire to that thing that you think is the final thing. So if consciousness is final, inquire to what is aware of consciousness.
I really just all I'm trying to do.
Now we're just off the deep end, but I'm always going to go off the deep end in long form.
Right. No. Well, all I'm trying to do is get terms that we agree upon. Right. So the reason morality as first philosophy, right? So peace before truth. Like if we don't have the same terms,
right,
it doesn't matter. So when I hear absolute and objective, and I think of these things, it just throws.
But to think that there's not an absolute or
I'm not saying
objective thing,
but
it also can throw you off too from finding out if there is
right.
one.
But what people in our society associate with absolute truth is not even necessarily, is not really science. They associate religion with absolute truth.
Yep.
Because
And
the only people they hear talk about absolute truth are fundamentalists who want absolute power. Mm-hmm. So the travesty to me is not that there's I mean, I just feel like it's a better safety net mechanism to just say none of it's absolute. Some other could come to me and express to me something that I had never seen before. There's totality,
Right.
but it's not that there's some problem with totality. I can't think of a time where I wouldn't say that consciousness is always conscious of something is not a universal truth, right? It seems like it's true all the time. The same as 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
But
it's funny. Well, it's funny that you use that exact example because in chapter 11 of the book "I Am That" by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he discusses awareness and consciousness, and he says awareness is primordial. It's prior to consciousness, and consciousness comes into being out of that which is prior to it, which would be awareness, and then consciousness is only ever of things. So he literally verbatim describes it.
Yeah, we just have a different understanding of consciousness.
Exactly. And then the thing is, though, is that he's describing what's prior to consciousness in the book "I Am That," and that's what the teacher will do is he'll say one thing to you.
But he doesn't mean what I mean. When he says prior to consciousness, he doesn't mean what I mean. He's saying it's awareness, which is not what I mean. When I say awareness and
I'm not
consciousness,
arguing. I'm just saying
I'm
that
using
you
them
brought the thing up.
interchangeably.
See, awareness and consciousness aren't interchangeable because awareness is not of things. Awareness is total.
No. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, awareness is total. Consciousness is on contact.
Well, he's defining differently than I am. What I'm trying to explain is what I mean. And so, like, consciousness is the container that all this is happening in, right? Or awareness, either way. And a lot of people just say, "Oh, I wasn't conscious of that," right? No, I mean
conscious of this
every
mic stand,
anything,
aware of the entire room,
right.
Conscious of, aware of the room.
Right.
Once I become conscious of this, now I'm not aware of the room. I'm conscious of the whole stand.
When I say conscious, I mean at the level of awareness.
Okay, yeah.
So
and that makes sense.
Right. So I mean everything.
Yeah.
So to me, there's nothing before that. That's like, but everybody has different definitions of like where. So there's like the ego, the kagi, the ego, God, I can't even remember Freud's stupid shit. Ego, ego, super ego. Yeah. I always felt like he was kind of a bootleg Plato with that.
He was getting on something though. He was setting up the stage for other people.
No, and there's a lot of important insights. I wrote an album about like his theory of really influenced heavily by his theory of religion. That the religious experience is oneness with everything, the oceanic feeling. And the other, and so when you're in the womb, I'm trying to wrap this up, but we just keep going. So I'm like,
every time you say something, I get more interested.
I know. That's how I'm like, and then he said this, so I gotta say, But look, I'm gonna put a bow on it. This is the last thing I'm gonna say,
right, I'm not gonna say anything else.
For time of brevity. But yeah, that you experience the oceanic feeling in the beginning. That's the origin. You're in amniotic fluid in your mother's womb, all your needs met, and then you have it when you have an orgasm, and you have it when you die. That's when you're one with everything truly, is in those sort of moments, or at least the religious experience is when you feel like you're one with everything. So
there's a direct experience for it though, because he tried to talk about it. We've all had it. We were all in the womb, and we all experienced that death
That's
thing.
true. And so
and the orgasm.
But yeah. But anyway, so God is the for and being for others from a phenomenologist viewpoint. or at least from historical. I mean, most phenomenologists I think are atheists. But anyway, I think if you describe your experience accurately, and then you will, I think, realize that everything is about other people. It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget. But anyway, we'll try to remember.
Good stuff.
Hell yeah, we got so much more to get to.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.